Hi, I'm James Jenkins, and you're watching What's Your Story Vancouver. Today I'm rocking the aviators because of our next guest is a pilot, actor, producer, and director named Rob "Scratch" Mitchell. Rob, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You know, we've tried for a few weeks now, weather permitting. We finally decided to do it today, but got a great backdrop. Can you tell us, well, first of all, how did you get your nickname, Scratch?
Everyone wants to know where Scratch came from, right? And so, like, every fighter pilot gets a nickname, and sure enough, in my first week on squadron, I was in a French squadron as one of the new English pilots, and there was some communication issues with the French and the English, and they basically asked me if I'd ever done air-to-air refueling before, and I said yes, once in French. We blasted off, and it was a different kind of airplane that I'd ever flown a tanker off of, and I missed. And it was a different technique, and sure enough, I scratched the canopy up really badly. It had to be replaced, and forevermore I was known as the Scratch Man. So,
you're a third-generation fighter pilot. Can you give us some of your background and family history?
Yes, and as a young child, I grew up hearing the stories about my grandfather flying Spitfires in World War II, and then I was living it, watching my dad fly jets, and it didn't dawn on me that that was a unique thing as a kid, that there were not many third-generation fighter pilots, not even now. And as I've become older and as I became a fighter pilot myself, that became more and more important to me. And so right now, I have two kids. I have a son and a daughter. It's actually my daughter that wants to be the fourth-generation fighter pilot, not my son. So that's kind of interesting that there's a lineage.
Well, good thing there wasn't any kind of golden watch, Pulp Fiction moment.
No watches.
Yeah, exactly. Your birthright kind of thing.
Yeah.
You've had some aha moments in your life. One, I guess, was your late teens when you decided you want to be a fighter pilot. And another one was, I read, that was on a beach or on a surfboard, basically, when you decided you want to jump into film. Can you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, so I've had a couple pivotal moments. Of course, growing up immersed in aviation through my dad and my grandfather's stories, I knew aviation was going to be a part of my life. But I did go through that later teen era where I was kind of rejecting sort of the tenets of my father, I think, a little bit. But I remember the specific moment. I was sitting on the kitchen counter speaking with my dad. I was in first year university at the time, and we were talking about flying airplanes. I said, "Dad, I want to be a fighter pilot." And I think it struck him. There was an aha moment for him that I'd sort of validated his life a little bit as it's being carried forward. And for myself, it was a defining moment where it crystallized right there at that moment where I said, I want to do that. So a simple situation, talking to my dad, I think we were drying dishes or just at the end of dinner, and I just said, I'm going to be a fighter pilot like you, Dad. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you from that moment to actually go and sign up?
Well, I think I went down to the recruiting center probably the next week and went in and said, like every kid at the time, because Top Gun had just come out, I said, I want to be a fighter pilot. And they're like, get in line, kid. You know, I'm like, oh. And then it was a barrage of tests and evaluations, and it took about another year and a half before I could even join. It's a long process, a lot of evaluations,
Exactly.
and thankfully, in hindsight, it all worked out very well. So.
Right. You never look back.
Never look back. But I remember the other moment, after having been a fighter pilot for 20 years in the Air Force, I was doing post-grad school in Australia. I was a lucky guy. I got selected to go over there on exchange to do it. And I was at that junction point where I was a lieutenant colonel, probably promoted to colonel, and perhaps beyond. I was told that I was on a list to become a general, all things being equal. And I wasn't sure if that's really what I wanted, beyond sort of the ego sense of, hey, I get to be a general potentially. That's, it's nice to be told that. But it wasn't what really energized me, and a very interesting thing, it actually didn't scare me.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is funny. I would have thought as a young person, like, oh, being a general, there's lots of pressure and responsibility.
Exactly.
But it didn't actually scare me. And I'd become a surfer while I was in Australia, and I was processing all this information and sort of this existential, where's my life going to go? I was 39 years old, and I have the opportunity to potentially go pursue an entirely different career, having started early in the Air Force and had a very successful career. And so I was sitting on a surfboard in Coolangatta, Australia, one of my favorite places on the earth, and I had this crystalline moment where I decided, no, I'm going out to be a filmmaker and an actor. And both of those, because as a child, I dabbled with a little bit of filmmaking. I stole my dad's little video camera and was, running Star Wars models down fishing line and trying to film that, and I was experimenting with that. And at the same time, I was actually a fairly friendly and gregarious kid, but I was pretty shy. And I was too afraid to try out for the drama teams and the clubs and whatnot. And so I said, no, I've always wanted to be a performer and an actor. I'm going to go do this because I think it terrifies me a little bit. And that's one of my guiding principles, is sort of leaning into fear a little.
That's great. That's a great, I can definitely relate being a shy teenager or kind of stuff, but I was always drawn to like filmmaking or the arts or acting, but definitely had to get over that fear of being in front of people or that kind of stuff, and public speaking. So right now you're producing a brand new series. Can you tell us the name of it and give us a little bit of a backstory?
Well, and so currently I'm involved in a production that myself and business partner are developing, and it's a hosted series that I host. And it's about aviation, which is a really big surprise, right? But this one, we've done something different. We're really going into the digital world with this one, where we understand that this digital abyss that's not quite understood, there's something to it. Clearly, a lot of content is going to go that way.
Exactly.
And we want to be at the front end of it. We want to be at the front edge of it. The series basically follows me and my misadventures in aviation, and the difference is, rather than sort of an observational documentary style, I'm taking you, the viewer, with me as my wingman, and I'm going to share this experience with you. It's breaking the fourth wall entirely. And so the show basically has three pillars of what I do in aviation. I'm an airshow pilot, so I bring you behind the scenes with me, and I explain how all this works. I talk through all the maneuvers and on the ground, what goes on behind the scenes in an airshow and how you do these maneuvers. The other part of it is I'm a film pilot, so on some occasions I'm able to bring the film crew behind the scenes when I'm making movie magic or doing something unique with airplanes and cameras. And then the last thing I do, which is kind of a fun side hobby I have, is I go wandering in the wilderness, climb mountains, and I track down forgotten, lost airplane wrecks, and I tell their backstories. And there's some real fascinating stories that are right in our backyard here in Vancouver.
Yeah, I've seen some of the pictures. How do you find them? You just know they're there, or you just kind of like GPS them? Or?
Well, there are some aviation historians that have documented where these crashes either are located or where they have approximated their position to be. And in some cases they're known, and maybe half a dozen, 100 people have been there over time. In some cases people have not found them. They recently found one on Vancouver Island that had been lost since the Second World War.
Oh wow.
So the series will perhaps tackle both those options, where we'll go try to find something that's never been found, and then we'll perhaps go to a site that's been found, but people don't know about it, and we'll dig into the history of that and what was going on. And sometimes there are great stories of survival, and people survived the crash, and they lived in the woods for a few days and were rescued. And those are the stories that are obviously better to tell, because there's a happy ending to them.
Exactly.
But in all cases, there's a really rich story behind them. And when people at the dawn of aviation, really in the 40s and 50s, when commercial aviation was starting, and the post-war, all the aviation assets that were available to the world, as they were figuring that out, there were a lot of crashes around the world, and a lot of those still sit there untouched.
It's crazy. I guess it's almost like a shipwreck. Really.
It is. It's effectively it's a shipwreck show in that sense, where we go and we revisit it and we reflect on it.
Yeah. How does that make you feel when you see something that you know that someone's died here, I guess. Or...
Well, in the cases where the stories, when there's been a fatality back in World War II in the airplane there, you can't help but to reflect on what that young person was experiencing, because back then they were very young pilots with very little training in some cases, and you can't help reflect on, you know, their final moments and what they were thinking. I was up at one on Grouse Mountain, and this young pilot was flying this F-86 fighter jet in the 50s, and sort of lost in clouds. And I've been there. I've been lost in clouds in a jet where my instruments were telling me something different, and that pit in my stomach where I was like, oh, this doesn't feel right. And in my case, it worked out. You know, in some other cases, it doesn't work out. And it's
yeah, I was going to ask you, have you had any close calls of your own, basically?
I have had close calls in airplanes, and I think that's why I reflect on some of these crashes. I was the leader of the Snowbirds jet team, and I hit 6 ducks leading the team.
Whoa.
They went through the front of the airplane like cannonballs. We were going 300 knots, 550 kilometers an hour, and the kinetic energy transfer just tore the airplane apart, and it broke the engine. The engine shut off for a moment there, and thought I was going to have to eject and whatnot. So there's been some tenuous times in the flying that I've done, particularly airshow flying. You're close to birds and the ground, and lost a few buddies. So when I'm up doing these wrecks and researching these wrecks, I'm very contemplative about them, and I try to treat them very respectfully, because I understand the stakes, and I understand as an aviator what that means, the ultimate price that someone's had to pay.
Exactly. I'm just thinking about, like, there's been a lot of famous wrecks, like Leonard Skinner, that kind of thing, right? And other musicians are famous pilots. Amelia Earhart, for sure, is one of them. They never did find that plane, did they?
No, there are a number of wrecks, like you say, Amelia Earhart, that never been found. D.B. Cooper, right? That the mystery money, and those are ones that, depending where the series goes, gosh, it would be fun to be the person that discovered that at a purely selfish level. But
exactly.
But at the same time, I think it also highlights there's a fascination with aviation, because it's something that most people don't understand completely. They know what going to an airport, getting on an airplane means, and they know what the principles of aviation, but they don't implicitly understand it. So I think there's a fascination with aviation that this may appeal to a wide audience.
So far, when you're pitching the new series, what's been the reaction from people?
I just returned from a big sales marketing event in Los Angeles where we were pitching the series, and the encouraging thing, I'll redo that. I just returned from Los Angeles for a big market, real screen market, where people go and pitch all their products. The really encouraging outcome of that was that people love the content, and we put a lot of effort into producing a really high-end pitch reel, and we've gone even further, and we produced 2 pilot episodes. And once they see those, you see their eyes open up, and they say, okay, there's something here. It might not be exactly what we're looking for in the terms of how you presented it, but we'd like to work with you and see if we can pivot it 20 degrees to make it work with our channel, our broadcaster, or what have you. So that's been really encouraging. We've had half a dozen people say, we want to work with you and develop this to something that might work for our specific channel.
Exactly.
And we knew from the beginning that we would have to pivot, so we made an 80% solution knowing that we would have to change directions with it.
Exactly. You got your proof of concept.
And the encouraging thing was that people seemed to really engage with it.
I think I'd definitely watch it. I think it's a great idea. I can imagine the footage must be fantastic. What are you guys shooting on? Like, who's all involved?
Well, it's right now my business partner. He comes from a sports doc background.
Okay.
Ironically, we met him filming a doc piece on a classic fighter jet I was flying for an airshow circuit museum, and we started talking about a number of different things that we were trying to both do, and we came together on this particular project. I have some of the connections I know from Discovery Channel and some great shooters and sound people, and we've collaborated on this project and we're bringing it together.
That's great. So what sparked your interest then into jumping into film? Like what?
What I think foremost, this is actually, maybe I shouldn't admit this on any sort of camera, but in the 80s there was this thing called breakdancing, and I got involved in it, and I actually got onto a group where we used to go downtown Victoria, in front of the Parliament buildings, and put down our silly little piece of cardboard and a boombox, and we used to street dance for money. And I was so fulfilled at being a performer. I think that triggered something in me that I knew later on in life I would need to be a performer in some case. And it's very interesting that I spent almost 7 of my 20 years in the Air Force as a performer. I did a tour as a F-18 airshow pilot, and then I did 2 tours with the Snowbirds jet team. Again, that's sort of combining my flying with performing, and very much a public kind of spectacle of flying, and that really energized me. So I think I recognized in my late 30s finally that actually no, there's a performer in me, and as the commander of the Snowbirds I learned what it was to effectively be a producer. Had resources, people, and a creative twist on things, and so combining those 2 skills I went, well, this is everything I've wanted to do, and filmmaking and acting is the next step for me.
It's like a natural progression.
It really was for me.
Exactly.
It didn't seem so bizarre. A lot of my friends thought I had lost my lid. and they, what are you doing? You're going to be a general, man. You're going to be a filmmaker and an actor.
So you like adrenaline.
Performing and the adrenaline. And
yeah, I guess you like performing and you like adrenaline. So I guess...
Yes. And it's really not for me, the airshow flying, and I still fly air shows in the circuit, it's not so much the adrenaline, it's the becoming very attuned with yourself and the craft, the aircraft. I love that human-machine interface, and what that you get through that whole man versus machine, man versus himself, those axioms. I find those are very much the same challenges I have in filmmaking, whether as an actor or as a producer or director. I still find that same kind of reward in that. And for me, it's not adrenaline in the sense I get this adrenaline rush and I crave that. It's the feeling of figuring it out and pushing myself to sort of the next level and becoming one with what I'm doing.
What are some of the projects you've worked on so far since you decided to jump into film?
Film, well, I came out of the gates in a very fortunate circumstance. I had an idea that I was developing about the airshow circuit. That's what I knew best. And I partnered with a company in town that the gentleman I'd known for a few years already, who's in aviation at a general aviation level, and also is a successful producer in town. And we collaborated on the idea. We were sort of developing ideas in parallel. Clearly he had more wherewithal in the film and television world, and I had deep connections in the airshow industry. We put that together and developed a series for Discovery Channel called Airshow. And that was a really amazing experience, eye-watering, sort of fire hose drinking kind of experience. It's a graduate film school crammed into a couple years. And I guess I cut my teeth on that Discovery Channel series. Coming out of that, I worked on some other Discovery series and directed a little bit there, but I really knew that I wanted to get into not only the scripted world, but I knew that my niche was going to be aviation, and I decided that almost everything I was going to do from that point forward was going to combine filmmaking, acting, or anything, or producing, was going to involve aviation in some capacity, and that's really what I've been carrying on with.
You directed some music videos too?
Yeah, so interestingly, a friend of mine, she's a talented local artist, T. Lizzie, and she's also a pilot. She's an Air Canada pilot, but she's a really talented musician. And she said, hey, I've got this idea for this song. It's very kind of period piece, and what are your thoughts? I said, well, I have access to airplanes and hangars. Let's put all this together and come up with something. And she mixed in swing dancing with airplanes, and we've had some fun. So there again, mixing music, film, and airplanes in this case.
When I first met you, I overheard you speaking about, you did a commercial, I think, was it for, was it Apple? or iPhone?
Right.
Yeah, and so can you maybe explain that? Like, did you?
So one of the really cool things I get to do is I'm a film pilot down in LA and around North America for that matter, where I fly the film platform, and I do that in this Lear 25. And I've directed in the back of helicopters and worked on a number of TV shows in that aerial coordinator, aerial director capacity. And this one of my favorite experiences so far was doing a job for Apple, where we went up and we chased the eclipse. So we went to Oregon, we deployed the jet, we had all the cameras rigged up, we had specially fitted iPhones and all the portals and all the camera stations. And we went up and we timed it to the second, where we went over Mount Jefferson, this volcano down there, just as totality occurred. And then as we overflew it, it revealed the backside of the eclipse, this white snow-capped mountain volcano. It was an amazing experience, and to work with one of arguably the world's most amazing companies. So
exactly.
Very cool.
You're like the ultimate vlogger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that's your new niche. Yeah. Any advice for your teenage self?
I would say what I learned in my 30s, I wish about what really energized me. I think I finally figured out that there was a performer in me, and that once I got that performer out and my desire to not only perform, but to create the conditions where I can create something, a production, whether it's something live, or it's an air show routine in the sky, or it's a performance in front of a camera. There is a real big part of my personality that wants to perhaps be seen and provide product for people to see. That's just, I think, part of me. It took me a while to figure out that, accept that, hey, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a performer.
Exactly.
And I think had I learned that early enough, I probably would overcome some of those sort of teenage shy years and reluctance, where really that's, I've embraced later in life.
Exactly. Well, you've achieved a lot so far in life. Education, you have a master's degree, don't you? Any advice for somebody coming up, trying to figure out what to do or what path to take? Somebody that wants to jump into film even? Any advice for?
What I know of film so far, and granted, I still consider myself fairly new to this, probably in earnest 6 years. I've been engaged with development and production, and I still consider myself very much a student of it all, of this art, of course. But what I did receive early on is a great piece of advice from a very experienced producer that's been somewhat of a mentor to me in town. He said, Scratch, reach into your back pocket, pull out all the lint, throw it on the table, and whatever else is in there, that's where you start. And so in my back pocket, I had aviation. And really that was the entry point to come into film here, not here.
Exactly.
And so I think if anyone has a special skill or connection to a unique aspect of life, that is a great place to start. And I think taking stock not only of what you have at your disposal, but who you are as a person, and you come to film with that, I think I think that will pave an easier pathway for you.
I think so. A lot of people have to realize that there's only one you, and you're unique, and you gotta basically build on your strengths and maybe not worry about your weaknesses so much.
Well, that's true, and play to your strengths, of course. I think as a younger person, I didn't know necessarily what my strengths were.
Yeah.
And I think if again, going back to the question, what would I tell myself as a teen, would be go figure yourself out a little bit sooner. And I know there's lots of exploring that has to occur, but I think those early indicators of what I really was about, or what I really am about, those indicators were there early on. And had I sought the solution then, or had a mentor back then that could have guided me, I think that would have probably consolidated who I am earlier.
Exactly. Well, Rob, I really appreciate you being on the show.
Hey.
Thanks so much. Keep an eye out for this guy either on your laptop, on your phone, or on TV. And we'll have all his links in the description below, and thanks for watching.
So Perhaps you've learned a little bit of my story, but I want to know what your story is, Vancouver. Our city, our stories.